Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, where we bring different leaders from various areas of expertise and have them sit down, share with us what they're seeing in terms of the landscape, and give us their 2 cents around themes, trends, predicting the future, things like that. And today we have our guest, Vijay, who is the CTO of Johnson Controls. Very decorated history and career um, in the C-suite as well as from the technological and innovation perspective. Happy to have you here.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's great to be on your podcast.
Of course, man. Tell us a little bit about Johnson Controls. Obviously, super large company, Fortune 500 company, but tell us a little bit about the business itself, and what kind of companies you guys are working with.
Definitely. So Johnson Controls, for those of you who are not familiar, is over 140 years old. It was started by Warren Johnson in the 1880s, and it's been all about buildings over that 140 years. So how do you heat buildings? How do you cool buildings? How do you provide security for buildings? How do you prevent fire in buildings? And how do you help design, construct, install, and service them? So full buildings lifecycle management solutions over that entire history. Most recently, in 2020, we started a software platform called OpenBlue, which really is focused on taking all of that data from the IoT inside the building, all of those device data, bringing it onto the cloud, enriching it with other IT data, applying AI, ML, and other algorithms against it, putting into a digital twin format, and then creating recommendations for our customers in terms of how to improve sustainability outcomes in the space, energy efficiency, asset health improvements, as well as general safety, security, and compliance across the entire space. And so, as we work with our customers, many of whom own large real estate portfolios all around the world, as well as hospitals, universities, K through 12, many different corporate sectors. Everybody wants to understand, what the energy efficiency opportunities are in their buildings, what the opportunities are to meet their 2030 plus net zero targets, how the equipments are performing, how their space is being utilized, especially as there are new patterns of work that have emerged in the workplace, and then fundamentally, how do we, drive safety and security in the workplace using all of that data. And we've done some really cool projects. We did the FIFA 2022 World Cup in Qatar, which was super cool. It was a first digital twin where we operated 8 stadiums concurrently from a single command room, and we knew all of the faults that were going on across all of those different stadiums, as well as different alerts. And then we've done some iconic properties that are corporate headquarters around the globe that have been really cool to work on. So we really are focused, though, on delivering a value proposition around energy efficiency, sustainability, space utilization, and asset optimization for our customers.
Got it. Very cool. Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. Would love to kind of dive into some of your background. Obviously, it's a very extensive background. Over a decade over at Ford, almost a decade at TD Ameritrade. And so before that, you were also a consultant. But walk us through a little bit more just the path to becoming more so, I would say, like on the development and engineering side of things, and like what was the natural curiosity towards that, maybe from your younger years before you got into the more executive roles. Because I think once you get to the more executive roles, there's a lot of different other profiles, traits that have to come in, and you have to learn a different type of skill set to evolve into those roles. But just talk us a little bit more about that early part of the career and just the learning and the interest.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Chris, and it always brings a smile to my face because I harken back to 1984 when my dad brought home the first Apple II computer in our household, and I would say that fundamentally changed the trajectory, of my life. And I must have spent, hours and hours with that Apple II, learning the ins and outs of it, learning how to program in basic languages at the time, learning how the different games on it worked, how different sorts of algorithms on it work. I mean, a lot of the basics of computing, and it just sparked a curiosity in me around the power of computing. And then, over time, moved into the PC realm, and that took me to my first job. Developing software in high school for a videotape store, which distributed videotapes, if you remember back then,
Yeah.
Blockbuster video type tapes to different stores and stuff. So I built them an inventory management system to sell and distribute tapes to different stores. And, that ultimately led me to MIT, where, I just, got on the early, train for things like AI, where I learned the algorithms around, things like neural networks and linear algebra, different algorithms, recursion principles, back in the early days, when computing was, a scarce commodity still at the time. I mean, we were programming on DEX and SunSparks, and, we were using, Emacs to do a lot of our email composition, as well as code scripting and things like that. And so I really learned sort of the fundamentals of how to develop software. And I think through that process, I really realized my particular interest was around developing business solutions with software. It was also sort of the onset of the internet. That was the time that Netscape's Mosaic came out, 1993, 1994. So super cool to think about, the possibilities of this, DARPA created internet connecting universities and sharing, information with a browser on top and building applications. So I went into consulting at that point, and really got hooked into the data and analytics space specifically, and how we could use data and analytics to deliver different business applications. And my career has spanned developing applications around disease management in pharmaceuticals, trading optimization for big financial services firms, building out customer data warehouses across multiple different lines of business. It's included, personalization around how to use customer information to deliver personalization. And it's just something that software is something that I've been very passionate about, since a little kid, and I still am super passionate about it. Even playing with GPT-4o a couple of weeks ago, I was super just geeked out, watching the video around the two GPT-4o agents talking to each other, because as a kid, you always dream about whether it's Rosie from the Jetsons, or 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Hal talking back in a conversational form. And I think to this day, that's sort of eluded us, even with the Amazon Echo. But then to be able to see how software and AI and data have make that come to life, I think we're fundamentally at a seminal moment in software. And I'm super geeked about that, as I was the day that I was 10 years old, and my dad brought home that Apple II computer. So that's super motivating to keep completely engrossed in the space.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I could spend some time kind of going back through your history again, but I'm more curious around, you're already kind of talking about it, geeking out on some of this AI tools out there. And I guess two versions, right? So like, how are you thinking about that as, the CTO at a company like Johnson Controls? You also mentioned that 2020 is kind of when you guys launched a software component. Obviously historically been, a conglomerate on the hardware side of things. I'm curious as to what sparked that initiative. Was it just kind of seeing advent of growing, other SaaS plays and embedded into hardware like Ring and Simply Safe and some of those types of players, where you started to see it become more commercialized and felt like that was the next natural step. And then obviously would be more curious also your sort of personal hot take on AI and how you how you geek out on it personally, but also where you think it could potentially go, because I think there's a lot of things from not just a professional perspective, but also from a consumer perspective. And there's both pros and cons. I think a lot of things to be really excited about, obviously things to be concerned about also.
Sure. I think those are all fantastic questions. So I'll start with 2020 and when we decided to start, launch OpenBlue, right? So I think this promise of IoT developed applications have been around for a long time, and the idea that we would be able to use data from machines to optimize their performance. Ultimately, if you go back, decades ago, Mark Weiser wrote about this notion of pervasive computing where objects would interact all around us based upon the data and the readings, that we would measure in real time, and hence the whole notion of IoT was born. And I think the building space has always been a little bit trailing some of the other spaces, automotive, aerospace, other industrial heavy equipment, farm equipment, John Deere types of things. And so I think it was very natural that, for the equipment types that we supported, chillers, control systems, security, fire, that the paradigms that have existed for a decade or more in other spaces like aerospace, automotive, and farm equipment would be clearly applicable. And so I think it was natural that from a business standpoint, the notion of driving more subscription revenue in our business, more stickiness with our customers, being able to proactively understand issues before they were occurring versus traditional break fix led us to starting OpenBlue as a platform. And then it just evolved from there that we said, hey, why stop with our own equipment? But, if we can connect, all of the different equipment types inside of the building, then we get full visibility to everything that's going on. And then moving from there, how do you add additional value through data and AI and, proactive recommendations to customers who want to understand how their living building in essence is working. So that's how OpenBlue really germinated. As it relates to AI in OpenBlue and other digital platforms that Johnson Controls, we've been in predictive AI for quite a few number of years, and so we've done optimizations based upon different variables in the building's environment. We've done forecasting of weather patterns, space utilization, multimodal types of inputs that have led to predictions around what might happen in a particular space with energy consumption and utilization. And so we continue to focus on those particular applications because they're so critical to how you save money with energy efficiency, decarbonization, forecasting, and things like that. What's different with generative is that, to demystify what's going on in the building, there's a lot of codes, a lot of faults, a lot of, manuals that have been generated over time around how do you fix and solve problems. And often, decoding those things is an incredibly time-consuming process for technicians. So they have to go through dozens of manuals or do lots of searches, or if a customer gets a fault, they're like, what is this fault telling me? I don't really know. Or if I've got local legislation in a particular locality like New York City, am I in compliance with that legislation or not? What is that legislation even telling me? So there's a lot of documents, so to speak, that exist in our business. And so augmenting, like static data, like faults and readings and things like that, and layering on top of that, well, what does this actually mean? The semantic decoding of that is where applying generative AI to traditional AI to build these hybrid applications around further demystifying your building's environment makes a tremendous amount of sense. And so for Johnson Controls, that's really one area where AI is so critical. So we have a field of 35,000 service technicians. They go out there every day. They're performing installs, break fix, servicing. If we're able to give them back 15 minutes on each service visit, that's that many more service visits that they're able to do every day. And with the talent shortage that exists, around labor right now, we're actually able to do more with more junior employees, trade schools who aren't experienced with, older models of Johnson Controls chillers and things like that. So it's a huge efficiency play. So that's one whole area. The second piece is just reinventing the way that we do business internally, whether that's in terms of creating commercial proposals, being able to do technical support for our customers, the way that we engineer our products and software. All of these things lead to, opportunities where we can leverage the power of generative AI to drive huge amounts of efficiencies, in the way that we work. Think about coding, right? You and I are software engineers by heart, and we love to code. But there's a lot of coding that we don't really like doing. When we were in college, and learning how to code, setting up, test harnesses, setting up unit tests, modernizing code stacks, remediating security vulnerabilities. Those were never things that, as computer science software engineers, we were particularly excited about doing, And, through the power of generative AI, a lot of the more mundane tasks, I would say, of software engineering can be greatly accelerated through automation at this point in time. And so I think, for our industry, that, represents a huge opportunity in terms of, the engineers working on much more meaningful problems. Now, the final thing you asked is like, where do I see this all going, right? And I think, fundamentally, 2024 will be remembered as a seminal inflection point in terms of, the generative AI and AI transformation period. Because in terms of, the ability to now have integrated multimodal conversational agents where you can take photo of something in a different language, you can have it decoded, you can have it recoded, you can then pass that on to another agent, in terms of, who can semantically understand that and respond to it. Those are pretty powerful interactions that, that are going to spark just a new wave of innovation as we go forward. So I see this circa 1998, circa 2010, after the iPhone came out and mobile apps came to the forefront. I just see this as a beginning of a long, golden age of software engineering. And some of this is going to be very, very scary to people because of the power that exists in what has been developed. Because if you think about it, right? For me, it crystallized after GPT-4o came out when I was down in Dubai, and I took a photo of something in Arabic, and I said, translate this, right? And GPT-4o took the image, translated it perfectly, right? And then I took a picture from the top of the Burj Khalifa, and I said, what body of water is this? And didn't know I was at the Burj Khalifa. Didn't have location information, and automatically say, oh, that's the Persian Gulf. You have a skyline view of the city of Dubai, right? And so being able to derive that context is just pretty powerful. And so play it out, right? So GPT-4 came out, about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago. In 1 year, that was trained on a 10,000 GPU NVIDIA cluster. This one was trained on 5 clusters of 14,400 NVIDIA GPUs, right? And the algorithms are only, as we know, as software engineers, the algorithms are only going to get more sophisticated. The computing power is only going to get more efficient and cheaper. Both AMD and Intel are now releasing chips, as well as Amazon releasing their own native chips, and I'm sure Tesla is going to release their own native chips as well. So the fundamental platform is there for innovation, and then you begin to layer over other things on top of that, like, okay, drones with cameras, okay? Drones that can now talk to each other, using communication channels, using generative AI that's embedded into those drones, right? And you can see all kinds of applications emerging from military applications, autonomous applications, household robotics applications. So I think we're going to see innovation accelerate, to the next level over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think when we look back in 5 years, 2030, right, let's say we're going to say, hey, this was a seminal period in the way that society was fundamentally changed forever. And that's going to be a big change for everybody that lives within it. So stay tuned.
Yeah, you covered a lot there. I've got a few questions I want to kind of like just extract from a lot of that tidbits you just mentioned. So I guess number one would just be around, some of the from Johnson Controls perspective and leveraging, a lot of these hardware devices talking to one another. And I can, totally see how generative AI plays a role in that. From some of the conversations, I think like people who are working with like open AI and NVIDIA and stuff, like their their perfect world scenario, or the world that they're believing is going to exist at some point, is going to be like a completely vertically integrated, business, you leveraging all aspects of generative AI as part of it, where ultimately you could have a 5-person billion-dollar company at that point, right?
Yep.
And um, in order to do that, a lot of the conversation though is right now centered around building the infrastructure to make it happen. So maybe some of these more like antiquated or legacy players, are now spending a lot of that money on data infrastructure, cybersecurity to kind of get that part of it in place to, offset the bad actors. They're also chasing for getting to that generative AI race. What are you seeing as like the priorities that you guys are doing internally to set yourself up to maximize the possibilities with generative AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of pieces to this. One is, as a producer of industrial equipment, for facilities, data center customers are one of the biggest customers of, you know, cooling solutions. And
Yeah.
so we both are one of the largest manufacturers of chillers, as well as we bought a business a few years ago called Silent Air, which supplies, air cooled solutions, modular air cooled solutions to hyperscalers.
Hmm.
And so those are in enormous demand right now, primarily because generative AI is going to drive a data center boom, is driving a data center boom, a chip boom like no one has ever seen before in humankind, right? It is akin to the first industrial revolution building factories, is you could say the fourth industrial revolution building data centers at this point in time. It's the
Hmm.
information revolution, right? And so from a business standpoint, that creates huge opportunity for us over the next several years, which we're working to fulfill that demand, right? The second piece of that puzzle is that, without question, AI is going to really begin to suck up a lot of resources, from an energy standpoint, like the need for energy in data centers and for AI is going to be a completely insatiable appetite and demand. Okay. And so needing to be more energy efficient, needing to be, come up with alternative solutions to mitigate, sustainability related challenges. Um, it's a completely a parametric dichotomy to, what we're trying to do with AI and power of AI and information and applications. And so for us, again, huge opportunities around being able to, provide more sustainable solutions, around energy optimization, things like grid interactive optimization with, solar and wind and other kinds of energy sources that can mitigate, the resource consumption and potential carbon emission increases that data centers are creating. And so, that's a second piece that's a big pillar of that. And OpenBlue will be at the center of that in terms of driving a lot of those, optimization opportunities in data centers and other facilities. The third piece is how are we positioning ourselves to use generative AI? And, I still see generative AI as not like one thing, but I see it as there's various different forms of generative AI. There's, one could argue that NLP, advanced NLP is generative AI. And then one can say that, hey, GPT-4o or the latest version of Gemini is generative AI, right? And in that spectrum of solutions, there's cost associated with it, there's capabilities associated with it, there's, composition of different kinds of applications, there's risk mitigation. And so one of the things that we've done internally is built out an AI as a service platform that basically is a plug and play to different types of models, both large language, more traditional, and can basically orchestrate based upon the type of app that we're trying to deliver and what we want to do with those apps, what the right model is. That also enables us to, let's say, if right now, if it's Azure OpenAI, that provides the best capability, we can use that as our predominant, LLM. If, Anthropic really begins to create, a different cost value paradigm, especially given, Amazon's new chipsets that they're introducing some of those on. I think that is a different paradigm that could be explored over time. So we want to create flexibility in our architecture so that, we bring the right tools, to solve the right problems at the right price point, And so just like cloud, right? So, we've learned a ton about cloud over the last 5 years, where to place the right workloads, what the right cost structure is. Ultimately, I love technology, but I'm also running a business. And so, if my business is just consuming resources that is not commensurate to the value that I'm delivering to my customers, I'm not going to have a profitable business. So those are all the different considerations that we're taking to mind.
Got it. Yeah, I mean that's a lot to unpack. That's another entirely different conversation, I feel like, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, those are great points, I think, for a lot of, I'm sure a lot of like senior leaders in similar types of roles as you is trying to analyze right now at this point in time. To real quick on the other side of things, you mentioned, the possibilities of generative AI from like a personal standpoint and drones talking to one another, things like that. Um, yeah, I think about also like legislation and how that could potentially play a role around how fast things go. Um, I think in the US at least, we're a little bit more loose with some of those things. The EU is a little bit more strict, and then, I think different parts of the world are more completely just government run. And so, um, how much of that potential do you think like is going to be rolled out on a global scale here in the next few years versus it being throttled through legislation in a way so that it can be safely deployed over time? I mean, like, so it's not about the technology itself, it's about the, whatever beings that are overseeing it is like rolling out in a pace that doesn't create chaos, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or
I mean,
confusion.
yeah. I mean, I think the past is always a good guide to the future, right? And what I would say is that technology and what gets out there will always outpace you know legislative efforts.
Mhm.
And I also think that you know in some ways it's a large planet. We have certain people who want to completely embrace digital and the power that it can bring, and then maybe some people that are taking more of a social cautious approach to it, right? Being a global business, we have to sort of take into consideration all of those different pieces, which is why we've built our own AI guardrails, AI policy, AI committee, just to make sure that we're taking those things into consideration, right? I think what we'll see is, like you just said, a fragmented ecosystem across the globe where, you know, some places are a little bit more risk averse, and some places are, much more, capitalistic in terms of, what they decide to accept, right? And what I would say is, this country, Asia, always been at the tip of the spear in terms of what they're willing to tolerate around risk and innovation, right? And I think Europe has always been a little bit more cautious, in terms of data privacy and data sovereignty and things of that nature. And so I think, we have to be considerate to all of those different policies and recognize the spirit of them. But I think at the end of the day, it will inevitably lead to a world where AI acceleration of innovation is happening at different places around the planet. I think there will be more risks that are taken here, and there will be more incidents, that occur as a byproduct of those risks that have been taken. And because there are inherently going to be less regulations here, and so I think that's just something that throughout the modern history of technology, that is just how the world has worked. There have been
Yeah.
places where there were early adopters, and there are certain places in the world that there are laggards, and I think this is going to be no different than that. But as a global company, the difference now is we have globalization, and so I think as a global company, we have to be considerate, when we develop all of these solutions. And I think that may be what ultimately limits how fast certain entities can go, because there's, limitations in terms of it's either global and you want the same solution to work across the globe. Certain industries, financial services. I came from financial services, is obviously going to take a much more conservative view around AI. Anything where the recommendations generated are, are have a human impact in the recommendations that are made, those are obviously going to need additional pairs of eyes to make sure that those can be validated, without the use of AI. So I think those are all going to be impediments that slow down what AI can potentially do. But I mean, look at what we saw in just over a year from OpenAI, right? With GPT-4o. I mean, I know there were articles published in the New York Times about, some of it's like vaporware or whatever it is, right? Let's even assume that, 50% of it was accurate, right? I mean, that's still game changing in my mind in terms of what we saw in a short cycle of innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I agree. I agree in a lot of ways that it's probably what we're gonna see it unfold as. That being said, kind of straying away from the more corporate setting and into more of like the maybe your own personal preference or just the more humanistic setting of things, right? Like we're talking about from, the pandemic to now, it's only about a span of 5 years. And it's like, I feel like, we've, as a human race, have now seen so much contrast in such a short amount of time in the whole scale of just human civilization. It's like, um, with some of these things you mentioned with AI, that's possible, and having different countries or different parts of the world that's going to be, more risk averse, some really pushing the boundaries of it. What I feel like it can go, like, I mean, it's kind of like a wait and see. It can go in a lot of different ways. It can be a really great positive outcome. Obviously, I can see a lot of the great capitalistic components of that, right? But obviously also see, some of the things that it can be harsh on humanity, like, the with social media and the internet and mental health for younger generations, and not be able to distinct what is real versus which is algorithmic, and some of that kind of stuff. And I think like how much of that concerns you and as in just like in your personal life, and does that take into consideration like, where you might want to be? Do you want to be in a place where it is more of pushing the boundaries or pushing the envelope, or some place that's going to maybe take it slower?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, Chris. I mean, you know, I think there's always pieces of technology, parts of it that give me pause. I mean, as a father of four and
Yeah.
two teenage boys and two middle school girls, I mean, I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly of what happens with technology. In terms of just all of the effects that have been written as it relates to iPhone usage and screen usage and dopamine effects and brain rewiring and all kinds of stuff, right? So yeah, absolutely. Anytime a major change in the technological paradigm is introduced, it gives me a lot of pause and concern, right? Um, and at the same time, that pattern has happened, you know, every decade probably since the dawn of humanity, right? And so, um, is there something that like anyone can do to basically either shield themselves from it, or I mean, yeah, I guess there will be those individuals who completely move themselves off the grid and basically say, okay, I don't want to be part of this society and I'm going to live off the earth. And certainly, that segment of the population continues to rise, every day. And so I think you'll definitely see some people who want to do that. But the rest of us, I mean, as an innovator, as somebody who's always loved technology and what it can do to help society, I think that the idea for me is to help teach people on using technology in the right way, whether that's as a teacher to kids, whether that's as, somebody in the corporate sector who can advise companies on how to best utilize this technology, looking at beneficial applications in the medical space. One of the reasons that I love what I do at Johnson Controls is because it's all about making the world a better place. Sustainability and energy efficiency. I mean, these are major problems that we have and we're gonna have. And so if I can use generative AI and AI to help drive better planetary outcomes, that's pretty motivating for me, right? And if there aren't people like me out there that are seeking to leverage technologies in that way, then I fear that it's just going to be the people who want to make a quick buck, or people who are um, actors that are trying to basically destroy parts of society. And so I almost feel like as Spider-Man would say, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's my great responsibility that, that I have all this technical knowledge, that I have to be able to apply it and share it with people so that we make the world a better place.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's you just hit it. It's education, right? I mean, it's educating. Well, you coming from a technical background and being exposed to it, obviously making sure your family's aware of it. I think the concern that I sometimes have is like there's a majority of the population that are not technical at all, right? And they are just almost like pure consumers without even question or thought as to why they feel a certain way as it relates back to their interactions with certain technology, right? And I think that's the thing is too that can be something so exponential in generative AI where if people cease to ask questions about it, like how is it giving me this information? What am I feeding to it to relay back to me whatever it's telling me? That can be concerning. I think is like those that may not have the acumen that really under that die even just like that curiosity or just and just become somewhat robotic in their consumption, right? So I don't know. That's it's an ongoing conversation.
People
Yeah.
like us, who are constantly, watchdogging different services out there, making sure that we're giving our own points of view on these things, contributing to different things like this, so that people can make more informed decisions, right? Like I was like very encouraged that organizations like, Underwriters Lab, UL, that, provides a lot of information to the public and companies, recently started a digital track, to kind of talk about, you know, digital safety and AI safety and things of that nature, because I do think that it's going to be a real problem. And I think it's, you know, probably every time this has happened, there have always been counterbalancing forces, right? Doesn't mean that there isn't going to be, some people who have unfortunate circumstances because of, what they see or what they read and following it. I mean, as you and I know, there's already tremendous amounts of misinformation out there about different things that people are blindly following, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a sad state, that we already exist in. And is it going to get worse in some pockets? Absolutely, without a question, because the accessibility to these tools um, are pretty significant. And um, so I think, I've always believed education is the way forward. When I look at things like what Sal Khan is doing with the Khan Academy, I mean, and embracing generative AI around how to leverage that to, teach people. I'm always so impressed by those commitments. And so I think we all who have that power need to do our part.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, I know we're up on time, and I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today. I know you're super busy, um, but that was really enlightening. Thank you for sharing your insights, your journey, your expertise.
Thanks so much, Chris, for having me on, and we'll look forward to interacting again soon.